Every time you pull into a gas station in California, the question is no longer, how much is it today, but how much higher is it going to go this time? Gas prices aren't just high anymore. They have become completely unpredictable, and that unpredictability is what really unsettles people. This isn't a sudden shock. It is the result of a fuel crisis that has been quietly building for years. As the supply system grows thinner and more fragile, refineries are shutting down. Energy companies are scaling back, and it now takes only a small disruption for prices to react almost instantly. What makes this more serious is that California still depends on fuel just as much as before. Yet, it is facing the risk of losing even more key oil and gas companies. In this video, I will show you why state leaders are now frantically trying to keep those companies from leaving, and why the fuel crisis in California isn't easing, but getting worse by the day. Why gas prices keep hitting California the hardest. Every time gas prices spike anywhere in the US, Californians feel it first and feel it the hardest. You see it at the pump before you hear it on the news. One morning the price looks painful but manageable. A few days later it jumps again, and suddenly the routine cost of getting to work, picking up groceries, or running a small business feels significantly heavier than it did just last week. This isn't just about expensive fuel. It is about the growing sense that in California, energy has become unpredictable, and when something this basic turns unstable, everything built on top of it starts to feel fragile. Despite years of talk about clean energy, California still runs on fuel every single day. Cars dominate daily life. Long commutes stretch across cities and counties. Trucks move food and goods across the state. And entire logistics networks depend on gasoline and diesel working smoothly every single day. Electric vehicles are growing. Solar and wind are expanding. But the transition isn't complete, not even close. The reality is that California still needs enormous amounts of fuel right now. Not in some future scenario, but today, tomorrow, and every morning people turn their keys and head out the door. When oil and gas companies pull back or leave, the real danger isn't politics, it is structural weakness. The fuel system loses its cushion. Supply becomes thinner, less flexible, and far more sensitive to disruption. In a state this large with this much demand, even a small crack in the system can ripple outward fast. One refinery goes offline, one shipment is delayed, one heat wave pushes demand higher than expected. Prices don't inch up. They jump. California's gas prices hit harder because the system has almost no room for error. Fuel doesn't magically appear at stations. It moves through refineries, pipelines, ports, and distribution networks that have to stay perfectly coordinated. When companies pull back, maintenance gets delayed, upgrades get shelved, and long-term resilience quietly erodes. The system still works until suddenly it doesn't work as smoothly as before. That is when people start asking why the same gallon of gas costs so much more here than almost anywhere else in the country. California hasn't stopped needing fuel, but it has made itself far more vulnerable to fuel shocks. The state still relies heavily on personal vehicles and long-distance transportation. Yet, its energy infrastructure has grown more brittle over time. When supply tightens, prices react faster here because there are fewer backup options. There is less slack in the system to absorb stress. In other states, shortages can sometimes be offset quickly. In California, those options are limited, and the market knows it. Every company that leaves takes more than supply with it. It takes confidence, confidence that fuel will be available, confidence that capacity will be there when demand spikes, confidence that the system can handle the unexpected. Without that confidence, prices become jumpy, traders react. Distributors hedge, consumers feel the impact long before any official shortage is declared. When fuel prices rise, the damage spreads far beyond the pump. Higher fuel costs bleed into everything else. Delivery fees climb. Grocery prices creep upward. Contractors charge more. Small businesses operating on thin margins feel squeezed first. For families on fixed incomes or retirees trying to plan month to month, those increases don't feel theoretical. They feel personal. Gas becomes another variable they can't control, another line item that refuses to stay put. California is pushing long-term energy goals while struggling with a fragile present. The state can't escape the short-term reality that fuel still underpins everyday life. When oil and gas firms pull away, the immediate consequence isn't a cleaner future. It is a more fragile present. That is why leaders are suddenly focused on keeping key companies from leaving, not because the vision has changed overnight, but because the system cannot afford to lose more capacity right now. The most uncomfortable question is how much instability people can absorb before everyday life becomes unmanageable. At what point does unpredictability become more damaging than high prices themselves? Californians are already living with the answer. Gas prices keep hitting harder here because the margin for error is shrinking. Demand hasn't disappeared, and the cost of disruption keeps spreading wider each time it happens. This isn't a temporary spike. It is a pattern that is becoming harder to ignore. As long as California depends on fuel but weakens the structure that supplies it, gas prices will remain sensitive, volatile, and unforgiving. And until that tension is resolved, Californians will keep asking the same question every time they pull up to the pump. Not how much, but how much worse can this get? Why the fuel crisis is getting worse. If the previous section explained why gas prices always hit California the hardest, the next question is even more unsettling. Why doesn't the situation ever seem to ease? And why does it keep growing more fragile instead? There hasn't been a single dramatic collapse or one shocking event. What is happening is a steady layering of pressure, quiet but persistent, until even a small disruption is enough to shake the entire system. A large share of the fuel California uses today no longer comes from nearby, but from far away. Roughly half of the crude oil refined in the state is imported. That means the gas you pump into your car each morning has crossed oceans, passed through ports, and moved through multiple layers of transit before it ever reaches a station. Every extra mile adds not just time, but risk. An offshore storm, a congested port, an overnight swing in global prices, all of it can directly affect supply at home. The longer the supply chain, the less control the system has. When a problem happens far away, California has no quick way to adjust. There is no immediate backup and no short detour. Short-term supply tightens, and prices react almost instantly. People usually hear the explanation later, but they have already paid more at the pump. That is the real cost of relying on imports, not constant shortages, but living in a state of permanent vulnerability. That risk grows even larger because California uses its own unique fuel standards. These standards serve environmental goals, but they also lock the market into a narrow lane. When supply gets tight, not every region can provide the exact type of fuel California requires. Even when fuel exists elsewhere, it can't always be used right away. And when the answer to where does the fuel come from next is unclear, prices tend to rise before solutions arrive. This is an unavoidable trade-off. Higher standards come at the cost of lower flexibility. Under normal conditions, the system still works, but when pressure builds, emergency coordination slows down. Prices respond quickly while supply struggles to catch up. That gap is what makes each disruption feel sharper to consumers. There is also another factor that is easy to miss. Long-term investment is quietly declining. Fuel infrastructure doesn't collapse overnight. It weakens when companies hesitate to commit capital in an uncertain environment. When future costs are hard to predict and regulations keep shifting, the response is predictable. Maintenance gets delayed, upgrades are put on hold, new projects are skipped. The system keeps running, but with far less resilience than before. People don't see what never happened. They only feel the consequences. A refinery takes longer to recover from an outage. A heat wave pushes demand just high enough to expose the system's limits. A delayed shipment suddenly becomes a serious problem. Gas prices rose not because fuel vanished overnight, but because resilience had already been worn down. Meanwhile, fuel demand still exists right now. People still drive to work. Goods still move by truck. Services still depend on fuel to operate. The transition to clean energy is real, but it isn't happening fast enough to fully replace today's needs. California is stuck between two moments in time, dependent on fuel in the present, while hoping to rely on it less in the future. The gap between now and later is where the crisis keeps growing. When the system has to carry current demand without being strengthened to match it, pressure builds. And eventually, the concern is no longer whether gas prices are high or low, but whether tomorrow's prices can be predicted at all. How many small disruptions does it take before instability becomes normal? When you cannot confidently plan next week's commute costs, next month's delivery fees, or this summer's budget, the problem is no longer just about prices. It is about the ability to plan everyday life. The fuel crisis in California isn't getting worse because one thing broke, but because several forces are pushing the system toward its limits at the same time. Longer supply chains, stricter standards, and declining investment. Each factor alone might be manageable, but together they create a market that reacts faster, recovers more slowly, and becomes harder to predict. This isn't a story of panic. It is a story of accumulation. Risk is building faster than resilience can replace it, and as long as that imbalance remains, the fuel crisis won't arrive with sirens or dramatic headlines. It will keep showing up quietly, one price increase at a time, asking the same question again and again. How much strain can this system really handle before everyday life becomes harder than people ever expected? Why gas prices are more sensitive in California. Gas prices don't just rise faster in California, they react faster. A small disruption that barely registers elsewhere can quickly show up at the pump here. That sensitivity isn't an accident, and it isn't just about taxes or local politics. It is the result of how California's fuel system is built, how it is supplied, and how people respond when they sense trouble. One of the biggest reasons is California's unique fuel standards. Gasoline sold in the state has to meet specific blending requirements that are different from most of the country. These standards are designed to reduce pollution, but they also narrow the pool of available supply. When shortages appear, California cannot simply pull fuel from anywhere and fill the gap. Even if gasoline is available in other states, it may not meet California's specifications. That means supply cannot be patched quickly. While other regions might ease shortages by rerouting fuel, California often has to wait. And in fuel markets, waiting almost always translates into higher prices. That sensitivity is amplified by California's reliance on imported crude oil. A significant portion of the oil refined in the state has to travel long distances by ship before it ever reaches a refinery. This adds both time and cost. Shipping schedules, port congestion, weather delays, and international price movements all become part of California's fuel equation. When oil has to travel farther, any disruption takes longer to resolve. That delay tightens short-term supply and pushes prices upward. The farther fuel travels, the more opportunities there are for something to go wrong, and California absorbs those risks directly. Plus, another factor is the lack of fast backup options. California's refining system is highly complex and tightly balanced. It works efficiently when everything runs smoothly, but it has very little spare capacity to absorb shocks. If one refinery goes offline or experiences an unexpected issue, there aren't many quick alternatives waiting in the wings. Supply doesn't gently adjust, it drops sharply. What might be a manageable hiccup in a more flexible system becomes a noticeable problem here. That is why even a minor outage can have an outsized impact on prices. Then there is market psychology, which plays a bigger role in California than many people realize. Fuel markets respond not only to actual shortages, but to the expectation of shortages. In California, where supply is already tight and alternatives are limited, even rumors can move prices. Distributors hedge, wholesalers adjust pricing, consumers rush to fill up. None of this requires a confirmed crisis. The mere possibility of disruption is often enough to push prices higher. Once that reaction starts, it feeds on itself, making the price increase feel sudden and inevitable. Put together, these factors explain why gas prices in California feel so jumpy. The system runs with little margin for error. Fuel must meet strict standards. Supply often comes from far away. Backup capacity is limited, and the market knows it. That combination makes prices more reactive, more volatile, and harder to predict than in most other states. What California is doing to keep oil and gas companies. It may sound strange, but California is now trying to keep oil and gas companies from leaving the state. After years of tightening rules and applying pressure, state leaders are increasingly worried that if more companies walk away, fuel conditions could quickly become harder to control. The question is simple: why now? The answer isn't politics. It is everyday reality. When gas prices swing up and down and supply becomes fragile, losing another refinery or energy company can make things worse very fast. One step California is taking is speeding up approvals for new oil and gas wells, with a target of around 2,000 wells a year. This doesn't mean the state is suddenly pushing for massive drilling. The real goal is to keep in-state production from falling too quickly. When oil is produced inside California, the state doesn't have to rely as much on oil coming from far away. Less dependence on outside sources means less risk, especially during tight market conditions. But there is an important point people need to understand. Opening new wells does not mean oil shows up right away. Wells take time to develop and bring online, so this is not a fix for tomorrow or next week. It is a way to reduce future strain. In other words, it slows the decline, but it doesn't magically solve today's problems. At the same time, California is also considering temporary flexibility in fuel rules during extreme stress. For example, when gas prices rise too fast, the state may allow short-term adjustments to avoid sudden price shocks. The goal is straightforward: prevent sharp spikes that hit families and businesses all at once. These moves are meant to buy time, keeping prices from climbing too quickly while the system is under pressure. That said, it is important to be honest. These are temporary measures. They don't change the fuel system itself. They can slow price increases, but they don't remove the underlying causes. Once the immediate pressure eases, the rules usually return to normal. The biggest issue, and one many people overlook, is that time is not on California's side. Building a new refinery takes many years. Developing new production also takes a long time. Completely changing the energy system cannot happen overnight. Meanwhile, fuel is still needed right now. People still drive to work, to the grocery store, and to medical appointments. Goods still need to be delivered, and every summer, gas demand rises even more. Because of this mismatch, the fuel crisis feels heavier, not lighter. California is trying to keep the present from breaking down while the future takes time to develop. What the state is doing can reduce risk at the edges, but it cannot fix everything immediately. So when you hear that California is trying to keep oil and gas companies from leaving, it doesn't mean the state has completely changed direction. It is an acknowledgement of a hard truth. Until real alternatives are fully in place, losing more existing supply will make daily life harder for everyday people, especially those living on fixed incomes. This means gas prices and living costs remain something to watch very closely in the months and years ahead. How rising fuel prices affect everyday life. When fuel prices rise, the impact doesn't stop at the gas pump. For many people, especially older adults living on fixed incomes, it quietly spreads into everyday life in ways that are easy to miss at first, but hard to ignore over time. It isn't just about paying more to fill up the car. It is about how higher fuel costs slowly reshape daily routines, monthly budgets, and even small personal decisions. The most immediate effect is the cost of getting around. Every trip starts to feel more expensive. Driving to work, going to the grocery store, visiting family, or heading to a doctor's appointment all add up faster than they used to. For retirees or seniors who plan their spending carefully, this creates a new kind of tension. You may start asking yourself whether a trip is really necessary or whether it can wait. Over time, that hesitation changes how freely people move through their own communities. Life doesn't stop, but it becomes more measured and more cautious. Higher fuel prices also raise the cost of transporting goods, and that effect reaches everyone. Trucks move food, medicine, household supplies, and nearly everything you see on store shelves. When fuel costs rise, those higher expenses don't stay with the trucking companies. They are passed along step by step until they show up in the price you pay at the register. Groceries get a little more expensive, home delivery fees increase, even basic services start to cost more. It often happens gradually, so it doesn't feel like one big jump. Instead, it feels like prices are always creeping up. Month after month, small businesses are usually the first to feel the strain. Local delivery services, repair workers, home care providers, and small shops rely heavily on transportation. When fuel costs rise, their margins shrink quickly. Many of these businesses don't have room to absorb higher costs, so they face difficult choices. Some raise prices, others cut back services, some simply struggle to stay afloat. When small businesses feel pressure, communities feel it too. Fewer services, higher fees, and less flexibility become part of daily life. For older adults, these changes can feel especially heavy. Fixed incomes don't adjust easily when costs rise. A higher gas bill can mean less room for other essentials. People start shifting spending, delaying purchases, or dipping into savings they hope to protect. This creates stress that isn't always visible. It isn't panic. It is a quiet recalculation that happens again and again each time prices rise. What makes rising fuel prices particularly difficult is that they affect so many areas at once. Transportation, food, services, and small businesses are all connected. When fuel becomes more expensive, the entire system tightens. People feel it not through headlines, but through everyday moments. An extra charge here, a higher bill there, a service that costs more than it did last year. Over time, this constant pressure changes how people plan. They become more careful, more hesitant, more focused on avoiding surprises. And for seniors, that uncertainty matters just as much as the price itself. Knowing what expenses will look like next month or next season becomes harder, and that makes everyday life feel less secure. What is happening with fuel prices in California isn't just about expensive gas. It is about the stability of everyday life. When gas prices become unpredictable, the pressure doesn't stop at the pump. It spreads into transportation costs, food prices, services, and even the small decisions people make each day, especially for older adults and those living on fixed incomes. The real concern isn't just how much gas costs today, but whether tomorrow's costs will still be within reach. If you live in California, feel the cost of living getting heavier, or simply want to understand what is quietly shaping your daily life, keep following Tax Hack Pro. Like and subscribe so you don't miss clear, practical insights on gas prices, living costs, and the changes that may directly affect you and your family in the months ahead. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our daily content. Now, feel free to check out some of the newest and best videos currently shown on your screen. Goodbye and see you in the next video.